child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We hope you had a wonderful weekend. Certainly a lot of football to watch. Of course, a national championship tonight that many of you perhaps will be watching as well. We're going to spend some time in the first hour talking about evangelism in a little bit different way and talking about the importance of asking good questions, which is, by the way, a topic that we have addressed before, but not looking at this particular book that has been very well received over the years and now is in its second edition. Then we're going to get back into issues in the news, and as you can see on our website, lots of things to cover: fake news, the 25th Amendment, and of course this new book that is out, Fire and Fury. So we've got a lot to talk about today, but in this first hour we wanted to spend some time with Randy Newman. He spent more than 30 years with Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru, established Connection Points, which is a ministry really to help Christians engage people's hearts the way Jesus did. Also serves as a senior fellow for evangelism and apologetics for the C.S. Lewis Institute in Washington, D.C., and has also served as a number of occasions as an adjunct faculty member at Talbot School of Theology, Reformed Theological Seminary, and Patrick Henry College, to mention just a few. Makes his home in Virginia and joins us now by phone. Randy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Sure. It's great to be with you. Thanks.
This is a second edition, so for some of our listeners that have been aware of some of the work that you've done, in some respects this is taking an idea that has been around for many years, and really all the way back to the time of Jesus, if you want to be honest about this, and applying it in this 21st century milieu. And of course, this second edition has a foreword by Lee Strobel. So again, congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much.
What can we learn in this regard? Because one of the things that you talk about, especially when you come from a Jewish family or you live in the Northeast around Jewish people, you know that every question is answered with a question. And in some respects, you grew up with that kind of background, didn't you?
Yes, I certainly did. I'm tempted to answer your question with a question just to be obnoxious.
I wondered if you were going to do that to me. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, but I will pose a question. What is it that asking a question does?
And I think it does.
Right away,
yeah.
It got you thinking, and it involved you in the answering process. So I think that questions are very powerful in not just conveying information, but really engaging a whole person involved in the thinking and wrestling with the issues.
Well, and interesting, in the foreword that is done by Lee Strobel, who's been on the program with us many times before, he talks about getting an email that was real hostile and, why does your God, if your God is loving, why does he allow so much pain and suffering in the world? And he started going through this kind of 5-point answer, and then he thought, maybe I should just stop for a minute and ask a question. Why did you choose to ask that question in light of all the other questions you could ask? And it opened up a dialogue. And so you found this to be the case over the years, that sometimes if we're willing to listen a little bit longer, and the way you can listen a little bit longer is to ask a question, you understand a little bit more of where a person is coming from, what their bias is, what their worldview is. And those can be very engaging kinds of questions, can't they?
Yeah, and they work in both directions. They when we ask questions and listen more intently, we find out a whole lot more about why the person asked the question, how open or hostile they may be, what some of their preconceived ideas, and then even which particular aspect of the question. Sometimes people ask a question like, why does a good God allow evil and suffering? But there's a whole subset of 5 or 6 ways they could be asking that, which which particular aspect of suffering are they thinking about? And so it works in our favor, helping us to understand them better, but it also works in their favor, I think, in that it helps them be involved in the thinking and wrestling process, rather than just sort of keeping us at arm's length and sort of a distance, like, well, let me watch you squirm and try to answer my question. Instead, all of a sudden, now the two of us are together involved in wrestling with the question. And I think that's going to help us a whole lot more with helping people come closer to the gospel truth.
And when you were talking about the different aspect of even a question like evil, what part do you mean? We are, I think, so guilty sometimes in the Christian world of answering questions nobody's asking. And that is, in this particular program, this radio program I talk about, we really want to help to give our listeners and even the viewers that watch us online the ability to articulate a biblical worldview, which is certainly the worldview aspect of it, but also to know how to defend a biblical worldview, which is kind of apologetics and evangelism. And too often, I think, Randy, we find that when people ask a question, we sometimes have our answer, maybe even formulating the answer in our heads before we've completely understood their question. And so as a result, we end up answering questions that really they aren't asking in the first place.
Oh, boy, this is painful, isn't it? Because I've done it so many times where I've answered questions people aren't asking, or I just don't listen well. I did a study, and I included this in the book, of all the different things the book of Proverbs might have to say about this aspect. And one of the Proverbs, I think it's in chapter 18, says that he's a fool who gives an answer before listening. And I think I was guilty of that for many years. And then I'm very thankful for this. In the sovereignty of God, he put me on a campus with Campus Crusade where none of the standard stuff worked. It was a very, very tough campus, Towson State in Baltimore. And all of my, wonderful answers, they didn't work. And so it was a very, very difficult start to ministry there. And again, I'm thankful for it now because it forced me to say, okay, we got to try something else. We got to experiment. And so there was a lot more asking of questions and listening and dialoguing. And it was a radical shift away from making a presentation of the gospel to let's have a conversation about the gospel.
Well said. Again, the book is entitled Questioning Evangelism, Engaging People's Hearts the Way Jesus Did. Now out as a second edition. It's published by Kriegel. You can perhaps find it in your local bookstore, but of course, as always, we have a link here to his website and also a way in which you can order it. It's in paperback, but also you can get it in Kindle, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, some of the ways. There's also a study guide and about 260 pages. And so we need to take a break. When we come back, though, you did kind of allude to what is in chapter 2, and that is, what does the book of Proverbs teach us about questions? And first of all, I would highly recommend for you, if you aren't taking the time to read through God's Word, that is certainly one thing I would encourage you to do. But a lot of people tend to also, in the midst of that, also read through a proverb a day. After all, there's 31. Now, some months you don't have 31 days, but most months you have something close to that. And many months you do have 31 days. And so reading Proverbs 1 on the first day, Proverbs 2 on the second day. But we're going to come back and talk about 4 lessons from Solomon. How to avoid an argument, how to recognize a fool, how to remember that people are people, and how to remember the power of the tongue. And then we're going to get into how some of these questions really pave the way for some answers. And we'll talk about some of the ways in which people themselves have been asking questions of us and how we would respond. So all part of our conversation today with Randy Newman, Questioning Evangelism. A little bit later, we'll give you a chance to join the conversation. Perhaps you have some questions. We welcome them. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the World Health Organization has just added an unusual disorder to its list of mental health conditions. People who play an excessive amount of video games could be diagnosed with a gaming disorder. Of course, they aren't saying that anyone who lives to play video games has this mental disorder, but they do set out some criteria to identify people with a gaming disorder. First, they show impaired control over gaming. This includes such things as frequency, intensity, and duration. Second, a person with this disorder shows an increasing priority to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities. Third, there usually is a continuation or even an escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. You know, video gaming is no longer just for the young. It has become increasingly popular with people of all ages. The Entertainment Software Association estimates that more than 150 million Americans play video games. So it's not surprising that psychologists have been able to document video game addiction. It turns out that the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders defined Internet gaming disorder as a condition for further study. It also said the disorder was most common among male adolescents, but we're seeing problems surfacing in every age group. Video games can be a safe way of improving hand-eye coordination, enhancing problem-solving abilities, and relieving stress. But the concerns about addiction and gaming disorder should concern youth and adults. Video games can be addicting and apparently take over the lives of many who find them too enticing to moderate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212, talking about evangelism in the first hour. Then we'll get back into some of the items in the news. Lots to talk about today, but we are privileged to have with us Randy Newman. It's a second edition of this book that's been out for a number of years, Questioning Evangelism, Engaging People's Hearts the Way Jesus Did. This would, of course, be a great individual study, but a little bit later we're going to talk about the study guide at the end, which would be something that would be ideal for a small group discussion. But Randy, we talked a little bit about Proverbs. Let's come back to that. There is a value sometimes in knowing how to really avoid an argument, and also sometimes to recognize when you're dealing with a fool. Now, I hate to use the term, but the reality is that some people fulfill the biblical definition of a fool, and we do ourselves a great deal of harm if indeed we keep trying to give answers to somebody who obviously doesn't want to listen to any of the possible biblical answers we can give to them. So how does Proverbs give us an idea of maybe how to make some prudent judgments about when to engage and when not to engage?
Well, it is intriguing, isn't it, how much time is given to addressing the fool in the book of Proverbs. And quite a few people have studied and found there's different words that are used. There's 5 different kinds of fools. And so the very fact that it's such a big deal in the book of Proverbs must mean that we really would be naive to ignore this possibility. And not incidentally at all, but we should be very quick to recognize it when we're behaving like a fool. So I think it's a very, very important issue. The way it relates to evangelism and apologetics is that what I was trying to say in that chapter is it's not just a matter of information. People ask a question, we give an answer. They don't know something, we tell them. I mean, that certainly is a very big part of evangelism, But that's not all there is to being a person, to being a human being. We're not just brains or just information gatherers or transmitters. We're whole persons with emotions and concerns, and sometimes we get angry, and sometimes we get defensive, and sometimes we're persuaded more by emotion than logic. And so we just need to take a holistic picture of what it means to be a person. And the book of Proverbs gives us lots and lots of insight. I also had a whole chapter toward the end of the book about anger. Because,
yes. Mm-hmm.
I hate to admit it, but anger very often seems to come along with the evangelistic process. Either people get angry at us or we get angry at them. It runs in both directions, I'm sorry to say. So I was just trying to address not just the intellectual or logical component, but the whole person with emotions. And so that's why I did a whole study from Proverbs.
And I think it is very well done. And, when you were probably talking to kids in the dorm at Towson State or out there in the student union or something like that, because I've been on campus as well, you'll have all sorts of intellectual arguments being raised about what about the pagans in Africa that have never heard, and of course, what about the problem of evil, and what about evolution, and on and on and on. When you know as well as I do that the real issue is that they're kind of trying to avoid the issue, because if they take seriously what you've talked about in terms of the Bible, that's going to affect their sexual relationship with the person that they are living with at the time. So sometimes we have to have some kind of discernment, some kind of biblical wisdom to recognize what the core issue is and what the major stumbling block is. And sometimes they do have very serious intellectual questions, because sometimes the heart cannot accept what the mind rejects. But oftentimes we also get a fair number, as you well know, of intellectual excuses. And sometimes these questions that you're talking about surface what the real issue is. True?
Oh, yes. And so, again, that's why I think a conversation with questions and answers and listening is so helpful, because I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I was trying to protect us against, on the one side is, well, it's all logical, so just give answers. Or on the other hand, it's never logical. There must be some moral issue. Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. We need to listen very, very carefully. And not just listening to the words that people say, but even the very tone of voice and body language and posture. And so I think if we ask the Lord for wisdom, He'll grant it. And you use the word discernment, and I think that's exactly right. So I was just trying to protect against the one-size-fits-all, or kind of like a multiple choice. No, like a two columns test. I picture, matching exams. Okay, if they ask question number 13, give answer number 13. And it's just, we need to know those answers. We really do. And I'm so very thankful for the rich apologetic material we have in our day and age. But it's not just as simple as just plugging in an answer to their question. It's engaging with people as whole persons.
Well, again, in one of your other chapters, you talk about how questions pave the way for answers. And one of the principles you use, I thought we might talk about for a minute, is reveille precedes revelation. And that's the idea that you must awaken people. Now, the bottom line is that people say, and especially when I'm on a college campus, young people say all the time things that are contradictory. But, let's take a couple. I think all religions are the same. I think all people are basically good. We hear those phrases all the time. And there's a value in saying, really? Do you really think that? What evidence did you have for that? How would you interact with somebody that wants to give you one of those kind of fallacious statements?
Well, we live in a time when we're flooded with cliches, sort of thoughtless, just repeating of things that we've heard, bumper sticker slogans. And so sometimes you have to kind of gently wake people up. That's why I talked about reveille. We have to. We almost have to say, now, do you really want to have a real conversation about this? Now, you probably wouldn't say it that way, but the greatest example of it, and it's shocking if we allow it to hit us, when the rich man came to Jesus and said to him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" You couldn't have asked for a better straight line, a better introduction. Please share the gospel with me, is what he's saying. And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good?" It was almost as if, okay, let's get past all of the cliche and the clutter and the sort of mindless, empty slogans. And I mean, he didn't slap the guy in the face, but it kind of had that effect of, well, why do you call me good? No one's good except God alone. It was as if to say, come on, let's have a real conversation. Let's not just, talk about, how many laws you've kept. Now, Jesus then did go on to answer the man's question by posing questions to him. But the first shot was kind of a wake-up call of, well, wait, why are you using the word good? What do you think that word really means? So I just think with a lot of people, if they're saying things that sound like they're just repeating slogans, it's worth saying, well, really? You really think so? You really think that you can believe anything you want? It doesn't really matter? Really? You really think it doesn't matter at all? And all we're trying to do is wake people up. And by the way, people don't like to be awakened.
Yeah, there's where that anger thing comes in pretty quickly, doesn't it?
We don't like to be, we don't like it when the alarm clock goes off in the morning, and we don't like it when people wake us up intellectually or theologically. We'd rather just kind of be asleep. So we shouldn't be surprised if people are, what? What did you just say? We need to prepare ourselves for that.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, real quickly before we move on to some other points in the book, there is a story that you've heard so many times before. It's one of those cliches about a number of blind men that encounter an elephant, and they feel the maybe the trunk of and they say, well, it's like a snake. They feel the tail is like a rope. They feel the ears, it's like a fan. They feel the side of the elephant and say it's like a wall. And each one has a different perspective. And that's kind of, again, the whole idea of all religions are basically the same. And since Randy Newman deals with that one, thought we'd mention that. Then we're getting into some other issues, some of the kinds of questions that we aren't asking, but people are asking of us, and maybe how we might be more effective in responding to those as well. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about the book, as always, we have information about it on the website, and certainly we've given you that opportunity to order it. And as soon as we fix this part of our website here, we'll also give you a link to his website. So we'll do all of that as quickly as we possibly can. As you go to our website, pointofview.net, we'll give you that opportunity to not only listen to this program again, to watch it again, but also to find some of the other resources that we have posted on the website today, including my Viewpoints commentary. So let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us today Randy Newman. And if you by chance have some questions about evangelism, maybe some advice you're looking for in terms of trying to witness to your friends, neighbors, coworkers, or perhaps the most difficult group to witness to, your family members, we'd love to enjoy that conversation that we can have with you. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Randy Newman with us, author of a book that's been out for many years and has been a perennial bestseller, and it is now in its second edition entitled Questioning Evangelism, Engaging People's Hearts the Way Jesus Did. It is published by Kriegel. And Randy, before we move into some of the questions that others, especially non-believers, are asking, I did want to at least focus on one that I mentioned a minute ago, and that is the story of the elephant and the blind men, because that's oftentimes used to say, well, you know, every religion has pieces of the truth, but nobody can really say that they have the whole truth. So that's why we need to be very tolerant, and we need to recognize that all religions are basically the same. How do you respond to some of that?
Well, you know, that's amazingly popular. I'm sure you know that. I mean, that has just been, you know, soaked up into the fabric of our society. And it sounds very humble and, tolerant and respectful. So the challenge for us is to try to point out that it really isn't humble, that it's really rather arrogant. And it takes a while, and it's pretty difficult for people to receive it. But what we have to eventually get to is to help them see the only way we could say that this guy has only part of the elephant, and this guy has only part of the elephant, and this guy has only part of the elephant, is if we see the whole elephant. In order to tell that story, we're claiming a level of knowledge that we're saying nobody has. And when you tell that to people and they start getting it, it's really uncomfortable. Because what you're saying is, you know, you're claiming to be humble, but no, you're really quite arrogant. And people don't like that. We need to point out, by the way, the only way you could tell that story and say that all those people are blind is if we claim that we're not blind, that we can see, but all those people are blind. And we could even push it a little further. Say, you're saying all these religious people are blind. Are you saying that the leaders of the world's major religions are blind? Jesus, Muhammad. But you who are telling the story, you can see? Do you see how arrogant your secular, pluralistic view is? And I'm telling you, you got to ask these questions gently, and you got to point it out slowly, but just realize, you know, the house of cards is going to crumble, and people are not going to like it.
Well, again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get into some of the questions people are asking, because we aren't necessarily always asking questions. Some are asking us. And one of those is kind of related to what we just talked about. Why are Christians so intolerant and or narrow-minded? And that is, you believe that Jesus is the only way. You believe that the Bible is true, but you don't believe some of these other religious works are not. So in some respects, that question from skeptics surfaces from what we just talked about, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, yes. And there's a number of different ways to go about this. And so, again, that's why listening and dialoguing is so important. It's not like there's, you know, here's the answer to that. But you come at it from a number of different routes. So one of them is along the lines of what I was just saying, that, well, everybody's actually rather intolerant. Everybody's narrow-minded to some extent. People draw lines, and they say what they believe and what they don't believe. Even the most open-minded secularist is very intolerant of all of the major religions that claim to be an alternative to secularism. So that's one tack, is to say everybody's narrow. Another tack is to I don't know how to say this. Let Jesus do the fighting for you. He's the one who claimed I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So pin it on him and say, now, why do you think Jesus made such an intolerant statement? I mean, it's really narrow. And people don't like to pick on Jesus. Well, some really staunch atheists do, but most people, think that Jesus is really nice all the time. But he made some really strong claims. So it's almost as if instead of facing face-to-face with the person you're talking to, sort of arguing, you both turn and come alongside each other, and now you're facing together the same direction, looking at Jesus, or looking at what he said in a particular place, or looking at a Bible verse. And so that creates more of a cooperative approach to things. So those are just a few. I mean, I try to go after a number of different strategies in the book. But again, it's not just as simple as stating, here's why we're intolerant.
Yes.
But rather, let's engage in a dialogue that moves both of us gradually to more and more understanding.
And I use that sometimes to say we bring in a third party into the conversation. In this case, you're bringing Jesus. But, let's take something else. Somebody say, well, you're homophobic because that's not one of your other ones. Well, or your view about the transgender is wrong. Well, then I'll say, don't necessarily get into a one back and forth between him and her or the two of you, whatever. Bring in, one of the articles we've posted on Point of View, or an article that you find on a variety of well-researched websites. And then the argument moves to between the two of you to that third party. And so that's, I think, another effective strategy. Well, let's take some phone calls because I want to give some people a chance to ask you questions today. So let's go to South Carolina first. And Donna, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, what would you like to tell us a little bit of the story of your neighbor's daughter?
Well, she's had a long-term history of just a rebellious since she was younger, and now has gotten involved in drugs. And they've tried to help her, but it really doesn't seem to help any long-term pattern. And they're in a lot of pain. And the parents have a faith, but it's dwindling to some degree because they see no results from their prayers.
And so any suggestions, Randy, on that particular score?
Ooh, boy. Well, I think as soon as you're entering the world of drugs and substance abuse, you really need to get help from specialists and people who are experts in this very dark world. So I would try to get help from counselors and people who just know that world of drugs or addiction, because there's a whole host of extra factors involved. I do think there are biblical answers to certain questions related, but it's just a much more complicated thing. So I don't know if I can provide all that's necessary. I would get in touch with people who know that world in a much better way than I can handle.
Sure.
Sorry.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take another phone call in just a minute, but let me get to another one of those questions. And this one shows up on campus all the time, and I can tell that you've worked with Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru. Why should we believe an ancient book written by dead Jewish males? You get the whole thing in there. First of all, it's an ancient book. What's modern is more important. It's dead people, it's Jewish people, it's males. Of course, we also have, some saying, why should we read anything by dead European authors and things like those? But there, in that question, you pack a lot of the kind of bias that especially the younger generation, if they've been on a college campus, tends to have about the Bible. And if, again, you're going to try to use the Bible to explain the gospel, that is one of those issues you really need to address pretty early on, don't you?
Oh, yeah. So, again, there's, a handful of different approaches that we can take. Again, I don't have a one-size-fits-all, but so sometimes we say, well, aren't you being just as narrow as you're accusing us of? I mean, if you're anti-male and anti-Jewish and anti-Bible, aren't we both being rather narrow here? Isn't this Aren't we both struggling? I guess the principle is what I sometimes call leveling the playing field. We're trying to say that we both have limits to what we think is good and right, and let's just be honest about that. The second approach, and I think this just needs to be more and more of our approach, is ask people how much of the Bible they've actually read. There's a lot more complaining about the Bible than actually reading it. And I just think the sooner we could be sitting with an open Bible in between us or pointing to specific verses, the better off the conversation will be.
Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ben Franklin reportedly said, "There is nothing certain in life except for death and taxes." Well, in a 548-page complaint, one man has targeted at least one of those certainties, and it's not death. Terry Lee Hines contends that the United States tax code has violated the Constitution by establishing taxism and institutionalized faith and religion. Because the tax code has the effect of favoring and even promoting organized religions through tax breaks and other benefits, Mr. Hines believes the tax code is in violation of the First Amendment. Well, I suppose this is the sort of case that law students are forced to grapple with, but actually have little effect in the real world. Some may dream that such a lawsuit is the silver bullet to bring down our ghoulish tax system. Alas, Mr. Hines' lawsuit will not free us from the taxman's visit every April 15. For one reason, taxpayers have a lot of hurdles to overcome just to bring the lawsuit. Mere allegations, even ones dressed up in the garb of a First Amendment challenge, that they do not like to pay taxes will not be sufficient. For now, Mr. Hines and the rest of us will have to continue to pay our taxes, and most importantly, the religious charities and houses of worship that are exempt from them will continue to be exempt. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Randy Newman with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Questioning Evangelism. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia this time. Jerry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Okay, thanks a lot for having me. I think we have to keep in mind this, and I appreciate you writing the book, but I think we should keep in mind this, that Christ's mission and purpose for coming was to seek and to save that which was lost. And we have the same mission. And I've learned many, many years ago and over the years and still learning that you can't, you know the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. And we can't push Christ down anybody's throat. And I believe the ultimate goal or purpose that we should have as Christians is just introducing him to Christ and getting them before Christ and let Christ kind of take over.
Randy, what's your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate your thought, but I disagree with it. Sorry.
That's okay.
I think there's too much engagement in the scriptures that give us models for this. It says that in Acts 17 that Paul argued from the scriptures. I see Jesus engaging with questions. I see Paul telling us in Colossians 4, let your speech always be full of grace, but seasoned with salt. So I think it's supposed to be a two-way dialogue, and I think we need to be more dialogical, reasoning, using our arguments aligned with the Scripture. So I think there's too many places in Scripture that give us a model to follow that's more than just stating or just introducing people, but rather to really rigorously engage with them back and forth.
You know, one of the things in the last part of your book is you talk about questions, and one of them, of course, is the question of compassion, and certainly that's one of the things I think Jerry was talking about, but you also have the chapter there, which you've alluded to before, the question of anger and even the question of silence. Sometimes just introducing somebody and say, oh, I'm just walking away, isn't necessarily enough. There are times in which if we sense that there is at least a little bit of openness, we can, if you will, push the issue. Now, again, we don't want to force anything down a person's throat. That's not the point. But sometimes, you can say, well, why did you say that? Or if I were to answer all the questions that you have about the Bible, then would you be willing to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior? So that we put a little bit of the responsibility on them. We do want to introduce them to Christ, but at the same time, we want them to recognize that we aren't necessarily ready to walk away if they are just about ready to make a decision and we don't ask them to make a decision. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. The whole thing about evangelism, it's this really mysterious, beautiful intersection of the absolute supernatural work of God and the Holy Spirit and human interaction. And so there's this supernatural work that God is doing. He's convicting people of sin. He's drawing people to himself. He's opening up blind eyes. But then there's this human dimension that has to be very, very seriously engaged. It's listening. It's asking questions. It's providing defense, as Peter tells us in 1 Peter 3. And so it's very human and also very divine all at the same time. So when I'm engaged in a conversation, I'm doing my very best to be the best conversationalist I can be, the best questioner, the best listener, and at the same time I'm praying like crazy, Lord, would you do the impossible in this person? Would you raise the dead? And it's this mysterious intersection that we can't totally, understand and have it down to a formula.
I would certainly agree. Let's go to Oklahoma. Donna, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I was just commenting on the lady that had her name was Donna also, and her neighbor and the daughter that had been so into drugs. And I know that the drugs and alcohol are such a horrible thing, but our God is so much bigger. My friend, her daughter for 3 to 4 years had been in alcohol and drugs and didn't even have a place to call home at night because they would just go from drug house to drug house. And my friend was raising the 3 grandchildren. And, through all these years, we just continued to pray that God would keep his hands up on her and keep her safe. And, she had went to the hospital on different occasions because she had OD'd. But you know what? God kept his hands up on her, and he kept her safe. And just recently, within, I'm going to say the last 3 months, she came to her mom's house, and she said, Mom, I'm just so tired of living this way. And she went away for the night, and then she came back the next day, and she said, I want to get back right. I want to, get my children back. I want my life to be turned around. And, it's not anything that anybody did except for the power of prayer and the hand of God that moved up on her and kept her safe through all these years and through these drug overdoses. And so I just want to say to that woman, don't ever give up on prayer, because it might take 6 months and it might take 4 years. But, God is faithful to his children, and he answers their prayers, and he keeps his hand upon those that we pray for. And I have absolutely no doubt in my heart or in my mind that it wasn't the prayers and the hand of God that kept this young girl, this friend of mine, through these years. And, to now she is back in church, and the first time she went to her church service, she said, I am so happy. I've not had this joy in my life. She said, for so many years. And her mom said, I have never seen her, said it's been 3 or 4 years since I have seen a happiness and a joy that was on her face when we walked out of that church service, because, God had got a hold of her. And, if the people wasn't praying for this girl and for him to keep his hands upon her, she could end up, she could have ended up in a devil's hell.
That's right. Well, and I'm just about out of time. I wanted to give you, Randy, a chance to also talk about how people can use this book, because, again, you have a study guide in the back. So it does seem to me that this would be something that not only could individuals benefit from in terms of knowing how to be more effective in evangelism, but the study guide is something that is designed for a small group discussion, isn't it?
Right. I added a bunch of questions at the end of each chapter or related to each chapter with the idea that it could be, a small group discussion, pick a chapter a week and work through it, because I find that when a group of people discuss it, it stimulates all sorts of other ideas that are related to the chapter. But, you can only cover so many scenarios, in a book. But when people then applied those principles to their situation, it just kind of accelerates the process of helping more and more people think about this.
Might mention, too, we do have a link now to your website, connectionpoints.us. It is the teaching ministry of Randy Newman, and this is an opportunity to really help you as a Christian to engage people's hearts the way Jesus did. And so if you'd like to know more about his ministry, it is there. If you'd like to know more about the book, this one and all sorts of other resources, including things like corner conversations, engaging with Jewish people, bringing the gospel home, and so many others, all of that available at his website. So, Randy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thanks. It's been a great privilege.
We're going to take a break. We have lots of issues in the news, and so we'll come back and talk about that. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to join us then, we'll be back with more right after these important messages.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, "Dad, we need to do something about it." And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Thought we'd get back into the news cycle. First hour, if you were not with us, we talked with Randy Newman about questioning evangelism, how to be more effective in our evangelistic outreach. But there's too many things in the news for us to avoid and to ignore what has been taking place. So if you go to our website, pointofview.net, you're going to find some of these articles we'll be quoting from. I know oftentimes people will say, I'll share this with somebody that is around me, maybe in the office later, or I'll share it with a friend. Or, of course, if I say something on Facebook, everybody says, well, where did you hear that? And they'll say, well, Point of View. Well, how do we know that's true? Well, that's why we post these articles, so you can read it for yourself, and I think you'll come to the same conclusions. The first one I'm not going to focus a lot of time and attention on, and that is the research that was done on fake news. And this piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal basically says, this just in, fake news didn't elect Donald Trump. And then we'll move on from that, because this study has been out, and we mentioned last Wednesday on our Millennial Report, but we never really kind of got back to it. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of the facts and figures on that, because that's one of those stories that if, you know, people were only watching the mainstream media, they weren't going to all these crazy fake news sites, then the election would have turned out very different. And we'll find out in just a few minutes as I go through that that is simply not the case. Then we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the new book by Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury. But mostly, again, what I want to try to do is give you a little bit of a sense of discernment, so that while this book is going to sell very well and there are lines forming outside of bookstores waiting to get a copy of the book, there are a lot of facts that are inaccurate. But I have one individual saying that even though we shouldn't take the book literally, we should take it seriously. Okay, I'll see what the distinction is there. And then I thought it's about time, since everybody's talking about the 25th Amendment, should the 25th Amendment be used to remove Donald Trump from office? Should President Trump be removed because he is mentally unstable? And so we'll get you into that issue as well. So lots to cover in the next hour. And if we don't get into it all today, of course, there's always tomorrow. And we look forward to a week of great broadcast and opportunity to learn on a number of different issues. But let me take on the first one. It's not one I'm going to spend a lot of time on, but it has to do with this argument that fake news elected not only Donald Trump, but a number of other individuals. And the argument that is made is that some of the Trump voters were duped by fringe websites that traffic in misinformation. And if those voters were better informed, again, I'm quoting from the Wall Street Journal here, Hillary Clinton would be president today. Well, the new study that came out, which we mentioned last week in our Millennial Roundtable, was actually done by a political scientist at Princeton, at Dartmouth, and the University of Exeter. And it really debunks the theory, because while fake news may be a real problem, the most dangerous distortions are really shrouded in a level of incredulity. What they found is this. They found that roughly about 1 in 4 American adults visited a fake news site somewhere during the election time. So that would say, well, wait a minute. That means that 25% of people were duped. No. You got to understand the context here. The stories on these sites accounted for, at best, about 2% of all the news that they consumed. In other words, as we shared just briefly, and I think Chelsea was a good example of that. Chelsea Human was talking about the fact that in some respects what they found is the people that went to these sites are ones that were heavy consumers of other kind of news. Think about it this way. Assume that you believe that I'm a credible source, but I, in the process of doing research for this particular program, go to a site, I'm going, I don't think that one's true, but let me go see what they're saying. And I look at it and go, nope, obviously not. And I keep going on. Well, then I would be one of those 1 in 4, but it doesn't mean anything about the fact that I believed anything that was on that site. Matter of fact, the study found that, quote, fake news consumption seems to be a complement to, rather than a substitute for, hard news. That is, they went on to say, quote, visits to fake news sites are highest among people who consume the most hard news. So in some respects, what it could be is those people that are actually doing the most thorough look at all of the research that was available, all the various news stories. They also, when they were doing a thorough search, even spent some time looking at some of these, if you will, fake news sites. But it turns out they probably were not influenced at all by that is all. So if nothing else, that is the first article I wanted to post, because if you start seeing on your Facebook post or a Twitter post or something like this, or hear people saying, well, if it weren't for those fake news sites, we'd have a different president. Well, the research that's come out from these researchers at Princeton, Dartmouth, and Exeter will actually dismiss that pretty quickly. Which brings us to the next point that I want to focus on for a few minutes, and that is this new book coming out by Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury. Now, the first point we have to recognize is that many people have referred to him as a tale spinner or a falsifier. And those have been some of the nicer things that they've had to say about this individual. So as we like to say on this program, sometimes you need to take things with a grain of salt, maybe a whole bag of salt when it comes to certain individuals who haven't necessarily always been known to shoot straight with the truth. Now, the bottom line is a fair amount of the quotes apparently came from one individual, and that is Steve Bannon, who yesterday, that is on Sunday, actually apologized for his role in this somewhat factual, somewhat falsifiable farce that is now going to be selling very well in bookstores around the country. And so you can begin to see that what we are dealing with here is a whole issue of, well, this just shows that he is unfit, which will get us to the whole issue of the 25th Amendment for just a minute. But let me, for just a second or two, if I can, start before the break. Matter of fact, I will just wait till after the break. Look at some of the errors that have been compiled. Now, this one comes from the Daily Caller, and even as I look through here, these are just a very small number of the errors, because some of the ones that we even mentioned on Friday, Kelly Shackelford mentioned it, I think Penna Dexter mentioned it, I think I even came back and mentioned it again. One of the claims in this book by Wolff is that indeed that in this book, Fire and Fury, it says that Donald Trump did not even know who the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, was. Well, that one doesn't even pass what we call the straight face test. You can go back and look at the fact that, first of all, Donald Trump actually contributed, when you look at all his contributions, $100,000 to John Boehner. I think he probably knows who he is. You can go back and find various tweets that Donald Trump sent to John Boehner, or actually said about John Boehner is probably a better way to say that. And you can actually even watch some of the videos of him playing golf with John Boehner. So that's just one example, but I want to come back and give you a couple of others, because it's important when you see that this book is going to get all sorts of press through all sorts of different interviews, that it turns out that there are just a lot of errors in the book. Which brings me to one of my favorite questions. Who in these major publishing houses does any fact-checking anymore? Well, let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the World Health Organization has just added an unusual disorder to its list of mental health conditions. People who play an excessive amount of video games could be diagnosed with a gaming disorder. Of course, they aren't saying that anyone who lives to play video games has this mental disorder, but they do set out some criteria to identify people with a gaming disorder. First, they show impaired control over gaming. This includes such things as frequency, intensity, and duration. Second, a person with this disorder shows an increasing priority to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities. Third, there usually is a continuation or even an escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. You know, video gaming is no longer just for the young. It has become increasingly popular with people of all ages. The Entertainment Software Association estimates that more than 150 million Americans play video games. So it's not surprising that psychologists have been able to document video game addiction. It turns out that the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders defined Internet gaming disorder as a condition for further study. It also said the disorder was most common among male adolescents, but we're seeing problems surfacing in every age group. Video games can be a safe way of improving hand-eye coordination, enhancing problem-solving abilities, and relieving stress. But the concerns about addiction and gaming disorder should concern youth and adults. Video games can be addicting and apparently take over the lives of many who find them too enticing to moderate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, by the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just a few minutes, we're going to get into the whole question of should the 25th Amendment be used to remove Donald Trump from office? That's the drumbeat we're hearing these days, so I want to at least explain a little bit why we're hearing it, whether that makes any sense at all, and some of the things that have been said. And so, again, the mental health of Donald Trump, the idea of using the 25th to destroy the 45th president will be something we'll get into in just a minute. But let me, if I can, for just a minute, use this particular piece from the Daily Caller. It is written by Sagar Enjeti, and I'm just going to use a couple of examples because after a while, once you start realizing that there are all sorts of flaws in this book, Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff, that should be enough. And it has been interesting to see the kind of change in perspective even over the weekend where a lot of people say, okay, we recognize that this isn't necessarily an always factual book. We recognize that this is an author that sometimes plays fast and loose with the facts, but because it reinforces the narrative that we think Donald Trump needs to be thrown out on the street, we're going to accept it anyway, even though we know it's just riddled full of errors. Does that make any sense to you? But anyway, let's get into that. By the way, here's another one that's kind of intriguing. The book says that Donald Trump did not expect to win. Matter of fact, Donald Trump did not want to win. Now, I'm not sure that's true, but okay, let's just take the premise of that book for just a minute. That Donald Trump did not want to win the election. He just wanted to use this to get some visibility, and that he and Melania were just disappointed when he actually won by accident. There's a problem with that because it completely contradicts the narrative that Donald Trump went out of his way to collude with the Russians to win. Have you thought about this just for a second? I'm not the first to mention that, but it is kind of an intriguing little point, and maybe explains a little bit why Michael Wolff, when he wrote this book originally, was supposed to be the chaotic first 100 days, which apparently were pretty chaotic. But he waited till now to have the book come out. And that's because if the book came out, say, March, April, May, when they were still planning to try to show that the Trump administration and Donald Trump tried to collude with the Russians to win, this wouldn't work because the premise of the book is Donald Trump didn't want to win in the first place. Do you see the point? I mean, it's one of those kind of interesting arguments. But let's get into a couple of these errors that have been rounded up. The first one, again, by Brian Stelzer, is he just takes one of the pages there and talks about all of the errors just on one page out of the book, just to illustrate the point. And that is the most striking portrait of Wolff's carelessness in checking facts occurs in the early chapters of the book, where he misspells the CNN political analyst's name, misidentifies the position Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross was nominated for, and places a reporter at a restaurant he says he'd never been to. So, you just go through... and actually, all that's in one paragraph as I'm looking at the reprint of the book right there. So in one paragraph, you come up with 3 different errors, all of which are somewhat significant. And again, my favorite line, who's doing the fact-checking at some of these major publishing houses? Let's take another one. Wolff parroted a claim that the president once skipped a meeting with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in order to get a haircut. Well, the White House White House reporter for the Washington Post, I should say, Ashley Parker, actually said that several journalists had heard the claim, but no one wrote it because every source with any firsthand knowledge said it simply wasn't true. And so, again, repeating things that no honest reporter would actually deal with. I mentioned just a minute ago, but let me come back to this claim that Donald Trump had no idea who former House Speaker John Boehner was after the election. Trump, however, was tweeting about the former House Speaker 7 times. And if you go to, by the way, the Daily Caller, in this case, I appreciate the work that they've done because it actually posts every single one of the tweets so you can read them for yourself. You don't have to believe what I say. You don't have to believe what Sagar Enjeti says. You can actually see the actual tweets that have been posted. And so, again, you can see this. Of course, also, I want to point out that Trump had been golfing with him and had contributed to him. And, again, you just have so many examples that are not true. And interestingly enough, Sagar Enjeti points out as well that then it also in the book, and, again, he's reprinting one of the pages there, page 37, I guess it is, John Boehner had been a Speaker of the House until he was forced out in a Tea Party push in 2011. And that doesn't work because then this book makes John Boehner forced out a Speaker 4 years earlier than he actually was. So even in talking about John Boehner, the author gets it wrong. I won't overdo too many more, but I'll pick at least 1 or 2 more real quickly. The Wolff's book also says and claims that CNN is an outlet which published in full unsubstantiated dossier, which was the one by Christopher Steele that everybody's investigating. A little bit later, we're going to talk about Lindsey Graham if we have time. BuzzFeed is the outlet that published it, so he gets that one wrong as well. We can talk about, Sarah Huckabee said that... let's take this one. White House Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders noted to reporters that Wolff printed Communications Director Hope Hicks' age is 26 when she's actually 29. Of course, that's a small one. You have some about Tony Blair, some about Jared Kushner. You have some about Rupert Murdoch. And then you have some about Kellyanne Conway. And I can go on and on and on, and I won't. But I'm just trying to point out that it doesn't take long for individuals who have advanced copies of the book to find the errors. Once the book comes out, I'm thinking you could all put together a small monograph of all the errors in the book. And so some of you have some comments, so I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Ohio first. Sheldon, what would you like to add to the conversation?
First, I'd like to thank you for your radio station. It's most informative.
Well, thank you.
Then I'd like to comment. These journalists and authors and people that are news media, they should be held accountable. The lies should be prosecuted to the full extent. When you hear the news, you ought to hear the real news. Second, if they're calling President Trump mentally unstable, I wish we would have got one of him over 8 years ago. Thank you very much.
Well, you got a couple points. First of all, it is almost impossible if you're a national figure, and of course the president is definitely a national figure, but any person of any kind of note, for you to be successful in a libel or slander suit. Let me look at libel for a minute since it's obviously written. And that is, you have to say that it was malicious, it was defamatory, it was known to be inaccurate. I mean, the standard is very high. By the way, I pretty much agree with that. I still believe in the First Amendment. People have the First Amendment right to say anything they want, even to publish lies. Sorry about that. That's just the way the world works. So it is unlikely that a lawsuit could be brought. If it was, it is less likely that a jury would actually rule in that favor. And in most cases, the damage has already been done because the people that want to believe what's in Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury probably already believe it. But nevertheless, I'd love to get your comments about that. That's the first point that you've made. And again, this is why, as I just mentioned a minute ago when we talked about this idea of fake news, that it does seem to me that you need to read widely so that you don't get taken in by some of the facts by Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, because I just read you a short list from the Daily Caller. Or, of course, you can go to Gary Bauer. He did, I think, a very good job of pointing out the number of people that said, I didn't say what he said I said, or this wasn't right. Of course, I gave you the John Boehner story and some of the others. So there's some great resources. But let's, before we take a break, take another phone call. And we'll head up to North Pole, Alaska, KJNP. And Curtis, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. This fake news survey, they assume that if one turns to CBS, MSNBC, or Good Morning Joe, you're going to get real news.
True. And you have pointed out one of the flaws in the study itself, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yes, you win the award for catching the obvious logical error in the entire study. But nevertheless, even assuming that they believe that NBC, CBS, and ABC, and maybe even CNN are true news, and things that are on some of these obscure websites are fake news, even if you assume that, and I don't necessarily buy the whole argument, you still see that all the arguments that were made about fake news elected Donald Trump are just fallacious. And so, again, it was just fun to see that these individuals had to be honest with the facts. And when they actually did the research, and again, these are researchers at places like Princeton, Dartmouth, Exeter, and others, then, we certainly have the case. So, Curtis, you got a good point there. Made me smile, but we need to take one of those breaks. When we come back, I'm going to get into the 25th Amendment. It is time, some people say, to use the 25th to destroy the 45th. The 25th Amendment to remove from office the 45th president, Donald Trump, because he is mentally unfit. What are your thoughts? I'd love to get some of those. I will share with you what is happening on Capitol Hill and why we should be concerned about some of that. But that will have to wait till we take a break and come back with more right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. When a line's being used, use the 25th to get rid of the 45th, and that is the 25th Amendment, which I will explain in just a minute, to get rid of or to actually remove from office the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. It's been something that's been talked about for a month, and I thought it would be something that would be worth mentioning. We have posted a couple of articles about that. one from Politico, Trump and the 25th Amendment, and then another one, did a Republican senator actually attend a meeting about Trump's sanity? The answer to that quickly is no, except accidentally, because it was a meeting that that senator did not know was taking place. But let's give you some kind of Constitution 101. We have a 25th Amendment. Why? Because we've had some situations in which a president has either been incapacitated. In one case, let's look at Dwight Eisenhower having surgery, and during that time, the assumption was, but we didn't have a clear delineation, that Richard Nixon, vice president, was in control. We had a little more certainty with the assassination attempt against Ronald Reagan, in which George Herbert Walker Bush was in control. And so the 25th Amendment has 4 sections. First section's pretty simple. In the case of the removal of the president from office or his death or resignation, vice president shall become president. That, in a sense, codifies what has already taken place. When Richard Nixon stepped down, the vice president then became Gerald Ford. Or, of course, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson became the president. No controversy there. Section 2, whenever there's a vacancy in the office of vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who will take office upon confirmation by a majority of both houses of Congress. Well, again, we had that situation because then Gerald Ford becomes president. He nominates Nelson Rockefeller. Again, no controversy there. We get into Section 3, whenever the president transmits to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, he then would be discharged to the vice president as acting president until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary. This could happen if you know you're going into surgery, or if you've had severe depression or something of that nature, and you feel for a time that you need to get some therapy or some treatment at Bethesda. So that one not too controversial, but certainly is clarifying something that has always been a little bit less detailed by the 25th Amendment. And then the 4th section is the one that everybody's camping out on, and that is where the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may law provide transmit to the president pro tem and the Speaker of the House their written declaration the president is unable to discharge the duties, powers and duties of the office. The vice president shall immediately assume the powers. So the argument is being made right now that President Donald Trump is not mentally up to the task of being president, that he is, in some cases, delusional, that he is a narcissist, that he is not living in reality, and, of course, as we'll see in just a minute, that he has the finger on the nuclear button. There's no real button, but nevertheless, that's the tweets that have been coming back and forth. And so that is reason enough to remove him from office. So let's work our way through this. The story that I have posted here for you to read in its entirety, if you'd like, is the fact that Dr. Bandy Lee, she, for about 2 days back in December, this would be December 5th and 6th, briefed lawmakers, all Democrats except for one Republican senator who Lee declined to identify, that indeed she saw signs of mental instability on the part of President Donald Trump. She is, by the way, the editor of what's called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, which includes testimonials from 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assessing the president's level of dangerousness. And she said she was surprised by the interest in her findings during her 2 days in Washington, D.C. She said one senator said that it was the meeting he most looked forward to in 11 years, and said that the level of concern about the president's dangerousness was surprisingly high. Now, that happened in December, but the one thing that seems to have triggered a lot of the conversation over the last week has to do with the tweet that you and I have talked about on a number of occasions, and that is when you have Kim Jong-un saying that I have a button. Then, of course, what you have is Donald Trump saying that we have a bigger button and my button works. You know all about that by now. We've talked about it quite a number of times here on Point of View. So then that has caused a number of people to say that should be reason enough to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, again, this particular article in Politico, which is the third article we've posted on the website here, or the second article under the book, I should say, it says that the amendment is purposefully set up to require a high burden of proof, and there is no evidence that Vice President Mike Pence or a majority of Donald Trump's cabinet have turned on him, but that particular nuclear taunt is one that has caused people, even in his own party, to speak out. Now, the first point is that when there was that meeting between the Democrats and a Republican senator, that's why I posted another article that actually came out in the Weekly Standard, which actually points out that, yes, there was one Republican senator there, but not because, I assume he, but it could have been her, since we don't know who it is, because we have nobody saying that they were there. I mean, they've asked some individuals like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker and others. So anyway, they didn't hear back from all of the senators, but whoever that individual was there, I guess the word was incidentally, not intentionally. And you can see how this would happen. You could be in a meeting with senators, and then they bring in this particular individual who is Dr. Bandy Lee, and, oh, I'm in that meeting. Oh, yeah, I was in the meeting, but I didn't know I was coming to a meeting to assess whether or not we should invoke the 25th Amendment to actually remove Donald Trump from office. So first of all, it's not like you've got any Republicans on the bandwagon. Doesn't seem like you have the vice president even moving in this direction. And it certainly does not seem that you have enough of the cabinet there, which would be the requisite number to then require that you would remove Donald Trump from office. Now, I might also point out one other issue. Some of the people that want to remove Donald Trump would really like to also remove Mike Pence. But this is sort of like the best way we can come about something that looks like an impeachment without an impeachment trial. So we'll see where that plays out in the first place. But nevertheless, back to the point, this article in Politico points out that even if you don't have any prominent Republican senators saying this, you do have other individuals who have been sort of the never-Trumpers who have said this, and one of those is Bill Kristol. It's been a while since we've had William Kristol on. Maybe it's about time to get him on again, but he said the tendency was anti-alarmism amongst Republicans. He said that he was concerned that Trump's sudden fit of saber rattling was more jolting. And he said, if nothing else, maybe that reopened a conversation about the president's mental stability. Here's a direct quote from Bill Kristol, who again is the editor-at-large of the Weekly Standard. He said, I was focused on Iran and talking to people in the administration about serious policy. And then to see in the middle of what might be a serious policy and process, Trump's just flipping out. So the other day, Bill Kristol tweeted, I trust that the vice president has asked his counsel to prepare a draft document transferring power in accord with Section 4 of the 25th Amendment in case it's suddenly needed. But that he's discussed this with the chief of staff, Kelly. And so that's one of those individuals. I'll quote one more, and then we'll take a break and then take some phone calls if you'd like to join in the conversation. Richard Painter is an individual that has served in the White House as the ethics lawyer under President George W. Bush, and he tweeted on Tuesday that this tweet about North Korea, quote, is grounds for removal from office under the 25th Amendment. This man should not have nukes. So there are a number of Democrats that have said they think the 25th Amendment should be used to remove Donald Trump. It is hard to find anyone that's willing to come on the record on the Republican side of the aisle to do so. But, of course, that brings us all the way back to Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, in which he says at one point that virtually all the staff members of the Trump administration, and anytime you hear somebody say all, you know, you've had arguments where you never do this, you always do this. You know, you better not say that. When you say all the staff members are concerned about the mental stability of Donald Trump, that almost is lacks credibility at the outset. But let's open up for some questions and comments you might have. So if you'd like to join us, what about this idea of using the 25th Amendment to remove the 45th president? If you have some thoughts about that, 1-800-351-1212. It is something I thought we need to talk about. It's on the table. What's your thoughts? We'll take those calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ben Franklin reportedly said, "There is nothing certain in life except for death and taxes." Well, in a 548-page complaint, one man has targeted at least one of those certainties, and it's not death. Terry Lee Hines contends that the United States tax code has violated the Constitution by establishing taxism and institutionalized faith and religion. Because the tax code has the effect of favoring and even promoting organized religions through tax breaks and other benefits, Mr. Hines believes the tax code is in violation of the First Amendment. Well, I suppose this is the sort of case that law students are forced to grapple with, but actually have little effect in the real world. Some may dream such a lawsuit is the silver bullet to bring down our ghoulish tax system. Alas, Mr. Hines' lawsuit will not free us from the taxman's visit every April 15. For one reason, taxpayers have a lot of hurdles to overcome just to bring the lawsuit. Mere allegations, even ones dressed up in the garb of a First Amendment challenge, that they do not like to pay taxes will not be sufficient. For now, Mr. Hines and the rest of us will have to continue to pay our taxes, and most importantly, the religious charities and houses of worship that are exempt from them will continue to be exempt. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, we'll take some phone calls on whether or not to use the 25th Amendment to remove the 45th president. And I suspect I already know where some of those comments will come, and we won't spend a lot of time on it, but I did want to at least focus about half of our hour here on that. Just before we take some of those phone calls, let me just also mention that I didn't really say a thing about the Golden Globes last night. Oprah Winfrey perhaps was the hit of the night, in which she gave a speech, "A new day is on the horizon." But some people said, you know what, that could actually have doubled as a campaign rallying cry. And if you haven't been watching the news, there are at least two close friends of Oprah Winfrey saying that she's actively thinking about running for the presidency of the United States. Some of her confidants have been privately urging her to run. She has not made up her mind. When she was asked last night, she said no. She would certainly have a lot going for her, in the sense that she would have very deep pockets, and she would have a great deal of charisma and instant name identification. That was some of the things that Donald Trump had going for him. But again, talk about a cut and pay. Here's a woman right now, CEO of the cable channel COWN, I should say. She's a special correspondent for CBS News magazine 60 Minutes, an investor in companies like Weight Watchers, to mention just a few. And, of course, even though it happened once with Donald Trump, I'm not sure it is going to happen twice. There are a lot of people that are still surprised that Donald Trump, without any political experience, made it to the presidency. And now, because he has, well, we've got all sorts of people. Mark Cuban, of course, we might take seriously Oprah Winfrey, The Rock, and others saying, oh, maybe I'll run for the presidency. Well, you're going to find out it's a lot more work than you think it is, and you better be a lot more politically involved than you are right now in terms of some of the issues and information that you would have to have access to. But let's, if nothing else, see what we can take from the issue. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the 25th Amendment, but it's something in the news, and we talk about everything. Nothing's off the table, so I put it on the table to talk about. So what would you like to say about some of these claims that the 25th Amendment should be used to remove the 45th president? We'll go to South Carolina, WLPE. Eric, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, man. Kerby, I'll be honest with you. I'm 75 years old. I've been born again 42 years.
Yes.
And all this stuff's been going on since Trump's going into office, talking about him being mentally ill and crazy. Well, if he's crazy, I'd like to be crazy myself.
Great line. That's a great line. Yeah. If that's crazy, pass around the juice. Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
He's got a great family, but you know, I want the world to hear what I have to say. We're not here fighting liberals, and we're not here fighting Democrats and Republicans. We're at the end times, and you either love Jesus or you don't. Bottom line.
That's why I did a program in the first hour on evangelism, because I think the time is short, and it's time to go out there.
Time is very, very short.
Yes.
Listen, I've already seen in my own family, it broke my heart, where Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but to divide mother against father. I've seen it in my own family. And that means if you love Jesus and somebody in your family doesn't, there's going to be a division. But here's the thing. This Lee woman from Vietnam, she needs to realize where she came from. She's in the great land of America and talking about my president. We need to get you out of where you're at. Because she don't know what she's talking about.
Well, she is a professor of psychiatry at Yale University, so we'll give her that. And, you know, again, just to make the point you made just a minute ago, Gary Bauer was on just the other day, and he said, you know, I know President Trump and I know Steve Bannon. They're both intelligent people. But at the same time, he says, look, you know, Trump is portrayed as having no interest in briefings and unaware of key facts. And he says, you know, in my conversations with the president, and he's spent more time with him than I ever will or ever plan to, he's always shown a wide grasp of knowledge and details, which helps explain the incredible success he has. And I love what Gary Bauer says. You don't become a billionaire by being ignorant and by being dumb. More importantly, he doesn't have to unlearn the leftist drivel that infects every progressive politician in the city. So that's Gary Bauer's assessment of that, which is obviously very different than Michael Wolff's assessment in the book Fire and Fury. But let's take another phone call. We'll stay in South Carolina, but we'll go to a different radio station, WAGP. Jerry, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
One, I want to compliment Eric. That was superb. That is dead on. But what I was saying is that I'm just so sick and tired of character assassination. In the 70s, it was Nixon because he was a criminal, but he did the same thing the Democrats did, just not as well. In the 80s, it was all about Reagan. In the 90s, I remember the commercial saying that, you know, Republicans, because they had a smaller increase in school lunches and Social Security, were cutting them, and we were evil. And it goes on, and this presidency has been nothing but Hillary, the anointed one, was beaten, and we have to do everything we can because this is against all possibility. It can't have happened. And this is just another character assassination. I'm so sick of them.
Well, again, we have seen those before, and I appreciate you giving the history because I thought about doing that earlier. I mean, there were questions about Ronald Reagan's, especially second term. Now, we know he maybe showed some of the initial signs of Alzheimer's, but you're right. And every Republican president has been a crazy person and a dangerous person, and George W. Bush, and you have the Bush derangement syndrome that we used to talk about. Now we have kind of a Trump derangement syndrome. So this has played itself out in a lot of different ways. And so, again, I just thought I might put it on the table because it's a conversation that we certainly need to have as well. So, Jerry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. Take care.
I might take one more phone call, but let me just mention that if you cross the liberal plantation, you pay a heavy price, and I'll point you to two articles, one by John Fund, The Sudden Hazing of Lindsey Graham. I might get into some of that more tomorrow, but I'll just give you a preview now. Lindsey Graham, when he was critical of Donald Trump, had the red carpet rolled out for him on countless TV shows, but as soon as he decided the other day to join with Chuck Grassley to investigate Fusion GPS, and in particular Christopher Steele with that opposition research dossier, that phony dossier, now he's being vilified like never before. So there is a good example that when you cross the line, all of a sudden you're not exactly the welcome individual or guest to the program. You're persona non grata. And a couple of weeks ago, you might remember we talked about this whole idea of net neutrality. Well, and I will spend some time maybe talking about this tomorrow. The number of online activists that have threatened Ajit Pai, who is, of course, the chairman of the FCC, you know, the Uncle Tom of the Indian people. Is this the world you want your children to inherit? Dad murdered the democracy in cold blood. These are the signs outside of his home. He's already received his second death threat. And this is for an individual that decided to remove the net neutrality rules that were in existence only for 2 years. Now, the Internet did real well for 2 decades before we ever put in those rules. Some of those rules seemed to be just draconian and restrictive, and so there was a vote to remove those. And now just a full-fledged attack on the chairman of the FCC, which shows you, again, the character assassination, the vitriol that is here. And then we have those same individuals saying, you know, we really need to have a civil discourse. Well, you know what? Who's the one that's disrupting the civil discourse? And they seem to be coming all from one particular direction. But we are out of time, and so we will get into that tomorrow. John Smirick will be with us, but we'll also look at some other important issues. And if you find yourself saying, okay, I want to see that study on fake news, want to see some of the things being said about the 25th Amendment, it's all at our website, pointofview.net. Please take the time as you go there to find those articles. You can click on that button and maybe make a donation for donations. That would be greatly appreciated. Most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800